Hi, and thank you so much for joining me for the second last chapter of The Little Princesses by Marion Crawford. I'm a bit reluctant to finish this book. I've enjoyed it so much. This chapter is a humdinger one though, because Marion Crawford actually gets married herself, actually before Elizabeth and Philip do. So chapter 11, The Royal Wedding. I had now decided my own marriage should take place quietly during my next trip to Scotland. I said nothing to the King and Queen about this. It seemed to me they already had enough on their hands. Some weeks later, in September, the Queen was in Scotland with Margaret. She telegraphed me to come to tea with her, and I went wearing my engagement ring for the very first time. This brought the subject up at once. No one could have been kinder than Her Majesty. The Queen kissed me and wished me great happiness, but added, "I do hope you won't think of leaving us just yet. It's going to be such a busy time." And you just know that's why they ducked up to Scotland, because they knew Marion Crawford was up there having a holiday with her fiancé and about to get married, and they wanted to make sure that she would come back. Aren't I cynical? But it just seems so obvious to me. Once again, I made my promise that I would remain as long as I was needed, though I realised this meant postponing still further the real start of my married life, or making a home of my own. Now then, Ainsley the butler came in while they were having tea, and the Queen made great, to-do about saying, "Well, Ainsley, our Miss Crawford is getting married." And Ainsley congratulated her in his courtly way. She said something really interesting. "I've often thought what a wonderful Archbishop of Canterbury he would have made had he applied his talents in other directions." Then he went out of the room, and when she was on her way home again, when I went out to go home, I found he collected all his staff in the hall, where they stood lined up to congratulate me in turn before I left. Isn't that lovely of him? That would have been a real thrill for her, I think. George and I were married very quietly on the 16th of September 1947 by the Reverend Robert Dollar. I had congratulatory messages and telegrams from all the royal family, and later several wedding presents arrived. Queen Mary sent me a complete and very beautiful dinner service, and the Princess Royal gave me a visitor's book, Princess Margaret 3 bedside lamps, and Lilibet a coffee set. Margaret now came to the forefront much more. As soon as Lilibet was married, she would take her place as the princess in the palace. Among her first grown-up duties was the launching of a ship all on her own, and she had to go to Ireland to do that. And she was actually presented a beautiful bouquet of roses by a blushing young sailor, and she smiled at him in a way that would make his heart beat faster, and pulled a rose from her bouquet and gave it to him. Oh gosh, she was good at the theatre. She was very good at the theatre. I think maybe it was a pity in her older years that she didn't really get to shine as much as she did in her younger years, because of course the same thing happened to Harry. Very soon after William and Catherine got married, he actually stepped up in 2000, from 2012, 2013. He really stepped up into 2014, particularly with the launch of the Invictus Games. He sort of took over duties a bit, because the Queen always wanted young newlyweds to have those first few years pretty much left alone and to be able to just enjoy themselves. So he was actually put to more service. And the same thing happened to the other spare, Princess Margaret. This island trip came as a blessing to George and me, still on our honeymoon in Scotland, as it gave us a few more days. Then I had to return south. We had a rather sad little farewell as I left on the night train. We did not know how long our separation was to be. That's hard for newlyweds, isn't it? I arrived back at the palace to find Lilibet's wedding preparations underway. Lilibet was very happy now, and happiness, as it so often does, transfigured her. She was sweet and thoughtful of me, happy and thrilled that I'd got married first. I remember how she came laughing into my room one day, and I showed her an American paper someone had sent me. "Governess beats Liz to the altar," said the headline. We got a lot of amusement out of that, as no one in the palace had ever given the princess that particular nickname. Lilibet was immensely touched by the way her romance seemed to appeal to the world in general. Letters and telegrams came from every kind of place and person. I think it was the first time she realised just how much people loved her, who had actually never met her in real life, and just what it was that she stood for. One day, Lilibet asked me as the wedding presents were pouring in, "Crawfie, what have you done with George all this time?" I told her George was still in Scotland, unable to make any plans until we knew what was to happen to me. "But Crawfie, he must come to my wedding," Lilibet said, and promptly sorted that George had an invitation. So he came south. We could meet but little in those busy days, but occasionally he would come to the palace to see me. Princess Elizabeth asked me to bring George to my rooms at the palace in order that she and Princess Margaret should meet him, so he wasn't offered to actually stay with Crawfie in her rooms. He was actually staying somewhere else, and he just got to visit her at the palace, which is a bit rough, isn't it? As soon as they were introduced, Lilibet said, "I hope you're going to keep Crawfie in order, because you certainly bullied us for the last 16 years. George said all three of us talked the same way and laughed the same way and moved our hands the same way. And that's what I mean. She pretty much brought them up, didn't she? I know that I'm sort of sounding like a broken record, but isn't that funny? Same expressions, same hand movements. She obviously had a great influence over the girls. And I wonder if that actually fueled the Queen, or the Queen Mother as we know her, reaction, a little bit of jealousy? A little bit of jealousy creeping in, maybe? He was struck by the charm of the two princesses and how pleasant and easy they were, and like everyone else, he spoke especially of the beauty of Lilibet's face and the quick wit of Margaret. We were swamped with wedding presents and everything else was forgotten in the meantime. Margaret behaved, to all intents and purposes, like a grown-up young lady, and both her parents encouraged her. She was a real help and pleasure to them. Philip was now a constant visitor. He and Lilibet would be together in the sitting room, which I noticed that he had improved a lot. Philip had strong ideas about furnishings. Soon after the courtship started, I saw that a large sofa was drawn up in front of the fire with chairs on either side, instead of being isolated in the window with two solitary chairs on the hearthrug. So already he began to have his influence, and he made it look very home-like, she said. And that really moved me, because I thought about the fact that Philip was probably trying to create his first real home of his own, even when they were just, not even engaged yet, when they were just courting. The people of Wales sent a piece of Welsh gold for the wedding ring. This is a metal found only in small quantities in Wales. The royal wedding rings are always made of it, and even Meghan Markle's was. Sorry to be a downer, but it was. Margaret wasn't left out, Lilibet told Crawfie. "There's enough for 2 rings. We can save a piece for Margaret." She was always thinking of Margaret, wasn't she? She was quite lovely about Margaret. Now, Philip would come around, dash around to the palace to see the love of his life, and he would just, hurtle in, and he was always speeding in this really cool, rather little sports car that he had. And, they were quite concerned because they knew that he was quite a reckless driver. Late one night, after he'd gone home, the telephone rang and a scared equerry came to inform the king that Lieutenant Mountbatten on his way home had skidded and overturned his car in a ditch. Lilibet had to be told, and she was very upset and anxious and insisted she must speak to him on the telephone at once herself. Certain officials of the household, all of whom were devoted to Lilibet and had been her slaves throughout her whole childhood, she means slaves of the heart, was quickly perturbed about this. They did not feel that Philip should be allowed to drive the heir to the throne about London as he had been doing. There was another unfortunate incident not long afterwards when once again Philip was driving, and at Hyde Park Corner they had a slight mix-up with the taxicab. Lilibet came running in to see me when they got home, very bothered. "Oh, Crawfie, how am I to make Mummy and Papa realise that it really wasn't Philip's fault this time? It was the taxi, but they'll never believe it." There was resentment in some quarters about the secrecy that was maintained over the wedding gown and the bridesmaid's frock. Everything else to do with the wedding had been written about in the papers. Some of the accounts were quite fantastic flights of fancy. Every aspect of the young people's future had been commented on and explored. There was no feeling at all for the young and sensitive girl and what her reaction might be to the public speculation on the number of children she might have and what their rank would be. Royalty earn every penny they get with their loss of privacy at times like this. Parcels began to pour in, hundreds of them from all parts of the world. One evening, the lady-in-waiting and I started after dinner to open some of them. I always loved opening parcels, even if they were not for me. I picked one up, cut the string, removed several layers of paper, and found 2 soggy masses in my hand. I flung them away in horror, as it was 2 slices of very burnt and damp toast. With them came a letter from 2 young women who'd been making toast when they heard the news of the princess's engagement on the wireless. They were so excited and thrilled they burnt their toast to a cinder, so they sent the toast to the princess with a charming little letter of congratulations. How we laughed! An old lady sent a lace underslip, beautifully hand-done, Victorian work. It had been worn by all the brides of her family for generations. And she said that a lot of these really beautiful presents arrived, and often they were really meaningful to homes and aristocratic families even of the land. And for the first time ever, an old established convention was broken. Lilibet was allowed to keep presents that were sent to her. At other royal weddings, presents were accepted only from persons the family knew. A lot of people sent their clothing coupons to help her with her trousseau, but there was always return by registered post, as it was illegal to actually give clothing coupons to someone else. The magnitude of it all bewildered Lilibet. She was in those days rushed off her feet and hardly knew where she was. She'd been so simply brought up. And she said that there was a lot of material set, beautiful, beautiful material, for her trousseau. And also there was a lot of big bolts of material from all the overseas trips that the royal family had actually taken. And often they were gifted this divine silk and this gorgeous brocade material, in the huge bolts. And I sense, reading between the lines, that Crawfie was a little bit resentful of the little help she got and in relation to material. So see what you think. Lilibet said, I have so much, Crawfie. You're getting a home together also. I must share some of this with you. Make out a list of all the things you'll be needing most. I had great fun compiling the list, for in the midst of plenty, all I really needed were curtains for my little home. And this had presented rather a problem because material was in such short supply. Now, the king had given me for my lifetime one of the grace and favour houses, which I, in His Majesty's personal gift, this one was attached to Kensington Palace, looking over the palace green. And this is Not Cot. Listen to her description of Not Cot. It is a small cottage designed by Christopher Wren. It looks as if it had got to London quite by mistake from some distant country place. It was built of lovely seasoned red brick with a tiled roof and roses round the door. It has a little square garden behind a low white paling fence where snapdragons and lavender, a scented white Miss Simpkins border carnations grow. I had never before had a home of my own, and to me it seemed wonderful, like a dream at last come true. I used to stand back to admire the name painted on the little white gate, Nottingham Cottage. Now, of course, William and Catherine spent the first few years of their wedded, blissful life in Nottingham Cottage, and they only actually moved out of it after George came. But George was in Nottingham Cottage for nearly the first year of his life. Then they did move out to their rather extensive, beautiful apartments in Kensington Palace. So when the Queen offered for, Harry and Meghan, or expected Harry and Meghan to spend the first year of wedded bliss in Notcott, she expected it to be lovely and romantic and dreamy, because she used to love going around to visit Marion Crawford there, and she thought it was a gorgeous little place. And Marion Crawford even gave the impression that Lilibet used to pine, thinking about how much she would love to live in a gorgeous little place like that with the love of her life, Philip. But of course, Harry and Meghan couldn't handle it there, probably because they really can't stand each other, because it was too small and they had to spend way too much time together. And then she goes on to say again, "But I had my problems. Curtain materials and coverings for my floors and furniture were in very short supply, and they were a truly terrible price." Okay, Crawfie, okay. We get it. You resent the fact that they never offered you any material. But these, together with various other matters, had to be shelved for the time being. The wedding day was upon us. From the palace windows, the whole world seemed to flutter with flags. The crowds had begun to gather the night before, and by daylight the whole Mall was a solid mass of people, with mounted police riding up and down on their splendid horses, keeping the main road clear. Great numbers had slept out and were having picnic breakfasts and cooking bacon over little stoves. It was funny to open the window and find with the usual roaring noise the smell of coffee drifting in. There had been no last-minute festivities inside the palace, no evening party or gathering of any kind. There was too much to do. The King and Queen and their daughters dined quietly together. Lilibet went to bed very early. Philip had looked in during the evening and said his last good night to her, as single people, I guess. She came up to her room singing. There was a lovely feeling in the palace that night. We were all of us so happy because she was happy, and things at last had gone right for her. I went along to Lilibet's room very early and found her in her dressing gown, peeping excitedly out of the windows at the crowds. "I can't believe it's really happening, Crawfie," she said. "I have to keep pinching myself." So she ran down to have her last morning session with Papa and Mummy in their room. And standing there, peeping through the curtain though, Crawfie sort of felt quite sad. She looked such a child still, her child. It was difficult to realise she was grown up and would today be a bride. I couldn't help remembering the small golden-haired little girl I'd first seen. Could it really be 16 years ago? I thought of Ella and how dearly she would have loved this day, with her darling decked out in splendour and surrounded with all the magnificence and ceremony Ella always felt that her princess was due. But there was all these sort of troubles before the wedding. The bouquet was lost, and then it was finally tracked down because the footman had put it into a cupboard to keep it cool. At the last minute, Lilibet decided she wanted to wear some gifted pearls, and a private secretary had to be dispatched to St. James's Palace, where all the wedding guests were on display. And then the policeman wouldn't let him go in to actually get the pearls. They didn't believe he was who he said he was because they'd never seen him before. And then in the end, after he pleaded and pleaded with them, they actually came back to the palace with the private secretary and the pearls, with a 3-policeman escort, because they were scared that he was going to do a runner. The only person who remained thoroughly calm and cool was the staunch Bobo. She dressed her princess and then went over to the Abbey to be on hand to take care of her when she arrived there. The Queen looked beautiful that day. She wore a dress of apricot-coloured silk brocade, which I thought immediately more becoming to her than her usual shades of pastel violet, blue or mauve. The dress was plainly and simply cut, and with it went an apricot-coloured hat and wonderful jewels that caught the light in 1,000 different colours as she moved. Her face was the face of a little Duchess painted by Sorin long ago. She must have remembered another great occasion when she, a mere girl herself, had driven through such crowds and rejoicings to marry the man she loved, King George VI, of course. Lilibet had arranged seats for George and myself in Poets' Corner, not far from the King and Queen. "You must be nearer," she said, "as you've been all these years." I knew I saw the Queen give a little sigh of relief when at last the great doors were open and the princess came in. A princess indeed she looked that morning. She was pale. She'd used hardly any makeup. Her veil was a white cloud about her, and light from the tall windows and from the candelabra caught and reflected the jewelled embroidery of her frock. Her long spreading train, held with determination by Prince William and Prince Michael in dress kilts and silk shirts. That, of course, was an earlier Prince William, not our Prince William. He wasn't born yet because Prince Charles hadn't even been born yet. Wide skirts and a billowing veil made her seem suddenly much taller than she really was. If Lilibet was nervous, she did not show it as she came slowly down the aisle on her father's arm. The king wore the uniform that became him best, that of Admiral of the Fleet. Directly behind her sister, 3 paces ahead of the other bridesmaids, in emphasis of her rank, came Margaret, alone. The service must have been a poignant one for the Queen with its many memories. The past must have gone through her mind as it went through mine, in a series of pictures of what had been an unusually happy family circle, a home in which no doors banged and voices were never raised in anger, and a little girl had grown up in womanhood with natural good manners and a charm particularly her own. Hate to keep bringing it back to Harry and William, but they didn't have that. They didn't grow up with a home where there wasn't anger and there wasn't banging doors. And I think that really does have a severe, severe impact on a toddler. And I think it has a severe impact on the rest of their life. I think they carry that with them for the rest of their life. Unless you marry someone like Catherine. And then it was over. And Lilibet came out of the vestry on her tall husband's arm with that radiant look on her face all bride should have. And when she came to the place where her father and mother, the King and Queen, stood, she paused for a moment and swept them the most beautiful curtsy. To many of us there, this was the most touching and poignant moment of the service. There is nothing in the world so attractive as gentleness and good manners. Catherine. I have often thought that the young people who copy the princesses' hats and frocks and shoes and ways of dressing would do well to copy their beautiful manners. To me, gentleness and lovely manners are far more important than clothes. For good manners are a charm that never goes out of fashion and requires no capital outlay. She's describing Catherine, isn't she, the Princess of Wales? So I think Catherine has modelled herself after the Queen, the late Queen Elizabeth II. To the wild pealing of the bells and the cheers of the crowds clustering about the Abbey, we waited for our cars. Now get this, I think this is unforgivable. I had been invited to the family lunch party at Buckingham Palace, and for a while it looked as though I would never get there. In the end, my husband managed to get a police car to give me a lift. They didn't invite her new husband. They only invited her to the wedding lunch. And I find that absolutely appalling. That is such a way of putting her in her place. I just find that unforgivable. I know that everyone would want a seat at that wedding breakfast, but the woman had spent 16 years loving that little girl who was now a grown woman getting married, and I think not inviting her husband was a way of putting her back in her place. I'm sorry, I do. Anyway, I arrived at the Privy Purse door with just 3 minutes to spare and no time to tidy myself or powder my nose. I had a cherry red velvet frock and a large black hat with black ostrich feathers held in place with ruby clips. It was a gay and merry lunch party. The tables were decorated beautifully with white carnations and all that, and each of our places there was a large bunch of white heather sent down from Balmoral. The squirl of the bagpipes, I love that expression, the squirl of the bagpipes, warmed the hearts of those who came from north of the Tweed. The French gentleman sitting next to me, however, winced from time to time, but he bore it with fortitude. There were no long speeches. The king hates them and has always dreaded having to make one, obviously due to his stuttering. He was brevity himself, and then the bridegroom, Philip, got up to speak, but Crawfie couldn't really hear him because it was a very large room, no microphones, and pretty much everyone was saying, what did he say? Although they had so much on their minds and so much to claim their attention that day, both the king and queen came to look for me. Well, good. Well, Crawfie, said the king, I think she's happy, don't you? I told him I had no doubt of it. He went on to say how much it meant to them, my being with them all those years, and he looked as he spoke wistfully at the radiant Lilibet. The Queen kissed me. What a wonderful day it's been, Crawfie, she said. Yes, ma'am, I replied, though I feel as I too have lost a daughter. Her Majesty said kindly, I am sure you do, Crawfie. They grow up and leave us, and we must make the best of it. I'll stop bagging the Queen, or the Queen Mother as we know her. I'm being very cheeky. Rain had held off during the day, but with evening it had become foggy and cold, and lights streaming from the palace windows were reflected in the wet forecourt, where the open landau with its 2 horses waited to take the young couple away. A closed car would have been a great deal more convenient and comfortable, but all through the gathering twilight the vast crowds had been waiting there patiently, and they must not be disappointed. Presently Lilibet came running down in her new powder blue frock and its matching coat. She wore a beret with a feather the same colour, and she looked so happy. Hand in hand she and her husband ran the gauntlet of paper rose petals. We chased their carriage as far as the big gates, the Queen picking up her silk skirts, and came right up to the railings with us. For a long time we could hear the cheers rising and falling as the carriage passed through the crowds that lined the route all the way to Victoria, where fresh crowds packed the station. It was all over, and suddenly everything was very quiet. Another footman had a small tray laden with lost pieces of jewellery and bracelets, which he took down to the master of the household to be claimed. I hope they were claimed. The big wedding cakes, 12 of them, were taken away to be sent to hospitals. Oh, that's lovely. Only one of them was cut up and posted off to relations and friends. It goes in a larger box than it's customary, with the royal coat of arms emblazoned on it. The king and queen went to their own apartments, no doubt glad at last to be quiet after all the excitement of the day. They did not go out anywhere that night, but remained together at home. Margaret, still in her bridesmaid's frock, came along presently to my room, where I too had been very glad to sit down for a little while and rest. Margaret looked pale and tired, and I thought a little sad. Lilibet's gone, she said. Oh, Crawfie, I can't imagine life here without her. I couldn't imagine life without her either, and there was a lump in my throat. Never mind, I said as brightly as I could. You will be next. Don't be silly, Crawfie, said Margaret with a brisk return of her old spirit. You know quite well Papa and Mummy need me to keep them in order. What would they do without me? I kissed her and told her to go and rest. There was a party that night for the bridesmaids and ushers. They dined somewhere and went on and danced. I sat down to wait for George. I had left him at the Abbey, and I knew he must be trying to get to the palace to fetch me. Presently he arrived. We dined quietly in a small cafe near Victoria Station. Little did the waitress who served us guess where we had spent the rest of our day. And that is the end of chapter 11. Oh, wasn't that just divine? Hearing behind the scenes of Elizabeth and Philip's wedding day. And it sounded so lovely, and they genuinely sounded in love. It was romantic. I would say it was nearly as romantic as my own wedding. And probably yours. Lots of love to you all. I will see you very soon. I will be back the following Friday with the very last chapter of The Little Princesses by Marion Crawford. I hope you will share me, and I hope you will share this series with as many as you can. I'll leave the link to the complete series in the description box below so people can binge watch it and catch up with this wonderful, wonderful book. Thanks so much for joining me. See you again soon. Bye.